computer. Yes. So, I'm hearing echo for somewhere. I'm just trying to. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Scholars, colleagues, students, and partners from all around the world. We are happy to welcome you to the African Diaspora Resource and Research Center here at the University of Ibadan. Of course, the ADRRC is an offshoot of the Diaspora and Transnational Studies program here at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan. And it's a collaborative center jointly established by the University of Ibadan and then the Nigerian Diaspora Commission is also designated as the Ted Fund Center of Excellence for Diaspora Studies. And the center is dedicated to advancing cutting edge research and policy engagement and also engaging in capacity building in African diaspora and transnational studies more generally. And this seminar that we're having, this is our second edition, and the goal is broadly to set intellectual agenda, to create a sustained platform for rigorous engagement on issues and questions around migration, identity, belonging, and global interconnectedness. And today's seminar is titled Notes on Itineraries of Nigerians in India. And we are honored to host Professor Shobana Shankar, who is a distinguished historian and has contributed a lot to the understanding of Afro-Asia connections. I'm going to be reading a citation at some point during this session. But for now, I don't know if okay, Professor Senayo is not here, who is the director of the center. He's supposed to say a thing or two, but I think we'll just have to dig in into the session. Of course, Professor Shobana would have 30 minutes to give a talk, and then we'll proceed to questions and answers and all of that. So we would like at this point to encourage everyone to leave their questions via the Zoom link or the chats. We will take a few live questions, of course, when as time permits, but priority will be given to questions that have been submitted in the chats area. So without wasting much time, I'd like to quickly read the citation of our seminar speaker. So briefly, Shobana Shankar is a professor of history and Africana studies at Stony Brook State University of New York. Our most recent book, An Uneasy Embrace, Africa, India, and the Spectre of Race, 2021, published by Austin and Oxford, is the first history of how race and racialization have brought Africans and Indians together, yet also driven them apart. The book was a finalist for the P. Sterling Stocky Prize of Association for the Study of Worldwide African Diaspora and the International Association's Global Development Section Book Award. And the book was also longlisted by the International Convention of Asian Scholars. Professor Shobana Shankar has served as lead convener of the Afro-Asian Interaction component of NYU's Global Asia Program, a co-edited special issue of the journal Africa. Is titled Media and World Making Between West Africa and India. And that particular special issue includes article Touching Scenes, African-India Intimacy Imagined in the Contested Ahmadiyya Mission, which focuses on how black and white photography became a part of complex visual repertoire of African Asian emotional register. She is the founder and co-editor of Ohio University Press series, African Religions, Social Realities. She's currently writing two books, one on Nigerian traders in India and another on Nigeria's history of energy resources. Prof, I would like to invite you to give the talk. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Professor Senayon is here. I don't know if he would like to speak first.
I would like to welcome everybody to this
Prof, welcome back.
second
I
edition.
sorry, I didn't see you. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, I would like to welcome everybody to this second edition of our monthly seminar series and to say a very warm welcome to our speaker for the month, Professor Shankar. Basically, it's going to be another interesting session precisely because of the informed perspective our speaker is going to make to bear on the presentation today. We have always been interested not just in the current transnational relations between Nigeria and India. We have always also been interested in the history, and I remember that some years back I did an exploratory research on the history while exploring the Nollywood dimension of relations. But today we have with us a seminar scholar who will be able to take us through the various dynamics. And it is my pleasure, without wasting further time, to welcome Professor Shobana Shankar to this um, presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Senayon, Dr. Kudus, for the invitation. We've been trying to uh, push forward ways to work together for some time, and I hope I'll be able to come to Ibadan and spend some time at the institute, as I think it's a very important initiative that the institute is um, making in looking at the transnational diaspora of Africans in the world. And so thank you all for being here and for listening to my talk. I've been because for many reasons. I've been very interested on Nigeria, South Asia connections, going back for more than 20 years, from the time that I was first a student in Nigeria and saw how important these connections were, but also their tensions and their different expressions. And so I'm going to share my PowerPoint now. And begin my talk so that we can leave time for discussion. Please let me know if you cannot see it. This is
We
my
can see it
title.
is fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I want to start by thinking about how we can expand um, how we tell the histories of Nigeria, India connectivities as a way to think more broadly about Africa, Asia as two huge regions of the world with diasporas, global diasporas. And so if we think about Nigeria, India as a particularly important set of connectivities within a larger framework, I want us to think about methodology and how new research might look in the future as we use the framework of the African diaspora in Asia. Um, Starting, when we think about common linkages that are drawn between Nigeria and India, the usual suspects that we hear about are British imperialism as the main cause or link between Nigeria and India. Of course, economic history relating to Indian businesses throughout the African continent, but including in West Africa, if we think of the chelarams or other kinds of shops, that expanded from the colonial period of Nigerian history to the post-colonial period. These businesses have expanded. Post-colonial development, how are the two countries, once they became independent from British rule, cooperated on issues ranging from economic development to the anti-apartheid struggle, to trade For example, Asian or South Asian purchasers of Nigerian oil, for example. And then, of course, another cultural connection, Bollywood we have quite a bit of writing about this. A lot of these themes invariably come to India in Nigeria, but rarely Nigeria and India, which is what I want to bring attention to, but look at also the feedback, that is to say, between the two processes. Transnational history isn't just bringing one nation into another nation, but in fact, the back and forth, the multi-directional flows. But research until now has really focused more on India and Nigeria, rather than how Nigeria has shaped India. But we now have newer studies focusing on the Nigerian migration and diaspora in South Asia, which reveal important dimensions of global history and contemporary affairs from below. So here I'm thinking about how diasporic peoples, migrants, temporary or long-term migrants, are a way we can study history from below rather than from the top-down processes of the state or even big corporations. But how do we think about people actually moving and interacting? So some of the studies I've referenced here, their authors, we have work on Nigerian soldiers in World War II, Nigerian soldiers and other African soldiers serving in the British Army in India in the 1940s. I would love to see Oliver Coates. I've cited Oliver Coates' study here. He has an excellent essay using photographs of Nigerian soldiers in India. And there's other work on this topic, but I would love to see actually the follow-up research we've yet to do on some of these Nigerians stayed in India, married Indian women, had children, settled locally. We don't know about their histories. Dr. Wapmuk has worked on Sharkdam. Wapmuk and others have worked on medical tourism, Nigerian medical tourism in India, which is a growing industry. Nigerian students in India and in Pakistan and other South Asian countries. Bonnie Gill is an anthropologist who's worked on this topic, particularly in Delhi. And a very interesting new line of research, West African church leaders and congregants in India, by my colleague Meera Venkatachalam. And I have here actually from her recent presentation at a conference on Africa, South Asia in Zanzibar, she showed this screenshot of Pastor Enoch Adeboye of the Redeemed Church, his statement about India, the way the Redeemed Church, which of course many in the audience know a lot about, how he sees India. We bless the name of the Lord for what he is doing in India and how far he is upholding the church. It is my prayer that the nation of India will be saved and all will come to the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Meera Venkatachalam, my colleague, is doing excellent work looking at how Nigerian church members see expanding the church into India as a way of making a quote unquote predominantly pagan country into a Christian one through evangelism, but also that Christian Indians are very lifted up, I guess you could say, or feel supported by this efforts, where Nigerian and other African Christians are really their leaders because of the status of Christians in India, which is rather discriminated against. So these are some really interesting new directions of research that I just want to touch on, and I'm happy to share more resources if members of the audience want to know about more of this work, because I think it's really shifting how the gaze away from India's impact on Nigeria and rather this multi-directional flow. And we have to look over the historical sweep, bringing in African agency, as well as new ways of seeing Indian responses to Africa and African responses to India, like my work has tried to draw on topics such as race, racial difference, racialization, as well as gender and religious identities. So moving on to my next slide, what I want to focus on is part of my new research, which is really returning to the topic of textiles, which of course is a huge topic in Nigeria, India history. But what I want to show is that it's actually far more complex and has continuities over several hundreds of years, that if to make a bad pun, that need to piece together history that stretches back from the transatlantic slave trade era of the 17th, 18th century up to the present. So I want to start with some recent research I undertook. On the left side, you see this image of cloth that may look familiar to you, that is often called real madras handkerchief, or RMHK, or madras checks, even though it's not only checks. This is a piece of cloth that I found just a few months ago in Chennai, or formerly Madras in India, that shows that white threads are cut. And on the right-hand side is a weaver's shop that I visited on the same visit, in South India, who said this weaver used to produce this kind of cloth on the left with the cut threads that specifically for Nigerian consumers up until 20 years ago. We don't know when the timing of this particular example. The cut threads were done specifically because once Nigerian women, in particular of the Kalabari and other groups in the southeast, got the cloth, and you see these examples on the right side on the bottom of the slide, they would add their own designs. And so, in fact, this cut thread cloth commanded a very high price. And this weaver, Mr. Sekar, told me in India, he said, I used to have Nigerians come to my workshop and order this fabric, and I would weave it in over a week, and they would stay in Madras. It was then Madras, and they would stay, and they would collect the cloth and go back to Nigeria. His father was in the same business, and his grandfather was in the same weaving business. So his family had been in this industry of producing this textile over 100 years. And the main market was Nigeria. So I'm starting with this example to just highlight that Nigerians have been going to India for trading this cloth for many decades now, since the era of independence. But this cloth trade goes back at least to 1660. And here I come to my second slide. Next slide. You see on the top, actually on the left side, two maps. The top is the map of India on the southeast coast, which shows where this cloth was produced. We call this called the Coromandel Coast, which the British and the Portuguese gave this name. It was kind of a bastardization of an indigenous term. And the map on the bottom shows the places where this cloth was especially important for trade and has persisted into the present day of interest of cloth used in ritual purposes among peoples of the Niger Delta, and also Igbo people. So cotton checked cloth produced in South India was produced already in India before the Europeans even came. And then when the Europeans started exporting it, it became called RMHK, and they were using it to trade for human beings. As I show on the bottom, other pictures, that this was a canvas for Niger Delta people, perhaps since the Portuguese arrival, which we know was happening by the late 1400s, but in the 16th and 17th century. And these are Joanne Eicher and many of her former students have worked extensively on this topic. And documented how Kalabari women in particular actually add to the fabric. And so we have to think of this fabric as a canvas for Nigerians. It is not as simplistic as if, Nigerians wanted to buy the cloth and they kept it the way it was. No, they added to it. They added the value. And this is, in fact, Joanne Eicher and Tonye R. Cosima, who was her co-author. He's no more. She's still living. They did this research starting in the 1960s. They showed that this material was culturally authenticated by the process that women specifically added. Let's see. Okay. Now this is very interesting. A lot of the earlier history has been told, but I actually, through various sources, have found how that cut thread cloth, which I showed you, was actually being sold in markets in Lagos, for example, from the 1980s to the 2000s. You see in this newspaper article, Where to Buy Your Air Condition Wear, which was one of the names for this cut thread cloth, near the Isolo market, which grew up around the Harish Aswani textiles, the Indian textile factory. So this is where the cloth, we can assume, and again, this is research that's still in progress, that Nigerians bought in Nigeria, like Mr. Saker, the Indian weaver, met, they would bring it back to Nigeria and sell in markets like the Isolo market. So there's very interesting pieces of information that we can connect from over hundreds of years of this connection between Nigeria and India, that in many ways does not even involve the British. And if I won't get into it for the interest of time, that many of the histories of this cloth over the earlier periods, especially during the transatlantic slave trade, for obvious reasons, have focused on the European involvement and the horrific trade in human beings that was sparked and that was orchestrated by the Europeans. But there are lasting impacts that we have not yet fully and dealt with. And this is what part of this research is I'm trying to do. So here are some of the central arguments of my research. We have to go beyond simple economic entanglement in the cloth industry, and I would make this argument about other histories between Nigeria and India is what does economic history the economic commodities actually signify? We focus on Indians as traders, but what were Nigerians or other Africans actually interested in buying from them, and how did it spark even Nigerians to travel to India or other parts of Asia themselves, which is what we are seeing in the last several decades. Actually, I would say for the Indian connection, I think Nigerians have been going to India on their own, at least since the 1970s, to be trading in cloth, maybe even before. And I'll talk about why the post-colonial period was so significant. But here are some of my arguments. Cloth is not just any commodity. As we all know, cloth is very important to identities and the making of expression of ethnic identities, cultural identities, religious identities, gender identities. So I argue that cloth embodies the self-making of Southeast Nigerians and Southeast Indians over centuries, embedding their relationship in material practices. Nigerians knew this material was coming from India. Indians were producing it for Nigerians. The cut thread cloth shows that the Nigerian consumers' tastes came first. That was the primary concern for the Nigerian weavers. They did not care about the Europeans. They did not care even when the Europeans tried to imitate their fabrics. They cared about which colors, which patterns, and what styles Nigerians wanted, and that was their main concern in producing cloth for the market. The second point is that handloom textiles are the work of many hands. It's not just Indian producers and Nigerian consumers. As I've already made the point, Nigerian women in particular were very important makers of this cloth, and they used it as a canvas. And they also, this leads to my third point, they were creating value in the cloth. These cloths are very valuable, and I'll talk a bit more about this, but Joanne Eicher discovered, and Tanya Arakusima discovered this for the Kalabari people, but we could talk about other Delta peoples as well as the Igbo, that cloth was very meaningful, and it also was a property that was passed on from generation to generation. I'm sure we could also trace this kind of commodity within other ethnic groups, I mean, in India as well, that there's certain rights to cloth as well. And I cite here the work of an American historian. So this cloth has a lot of history, but it also has been erased. And it was actually an Indian scholar of cloth who said to me, some of the history of this cloth has been erased because in India, we knew it was the cloth of sorrow. That was, I have it in quotes, it was the cloth that the slave trade was built on, and I had never thought before that the transatlantic slave trade affected Indian history production as it affects Nigerian and American and Ghanaian and other peoples directly affected by the slave trade. Indians, to some degree, have also erased the history of this cloth because they know that it was used for enslaving people. And so we can't shy away from the ugliness of that history, but it also makes it more paramount to trace it. And honor the people who suffered, and also who have not been able to tell. We have no history for them because their history was erased by other people. There's also another aspect to this. For Nigerians, an ethnic contestation has emerged or exists over who owns this cloth. George, Injiri, these are some of the names. There are Igbo claims to have pioneered it. There are Delta minorities, such as the Ijos, who say that it's their tradition. And so I think there's a political history to this too, because of the region where this cloth was concentrated. You don't find it to the same degree in Southwest Nigeria or the North, where most of my work has been up in previous decades. So I think we also have to look at how cloth is at the center of ethnic contestations within Nigeria as well. For South India, I can talk more about this if people are interested. The weavers tradition is also about their history of being an oppressed caste. And I'm sure many of you know about the caste system in India, but it's a brutal system with parallels to slavery and enslavement, where people who were oppressed by people who were in so-called castes that were situated above them, or so-called superior castes, the cloth is very much tied to the way they tell their independence from this oppression. And I would argue that even producing cloth for the Nigerian market or other transnational markets brought some of these oppressed people independence and an identity away from the Indian government that took over their industry in the 1980s. So there's a lot of history to really unravel, if I can use, again, a pun from the textiles here. I will just go over this quickly for the interest of time. There are important commonalities for cloth in Nigeria and India. And the term that's been used, there's a scholar named Kamara who talks about, she compares the Indian and Nigerian textile industries since independence. She calls them identity imbued fabrics. And this is very important because this was why the Nigerian government tried to ban foreign textile imports, among other commodities. And so did India. Both countries share this idea of import taxation or bans to get the local industry to grow after independence, but also because identity imbued fabrics had a lot of religious and cultural meanings. Some of the citations here, things that I talk about, are the origin of the madras cloth, this checked cloth. This is from Arukosima and Eicher's work. In the Kalabari tradition, babies were wrapped in specific cloth. The funeral bed was prepared with these cloths. The cloth also had a religious significance in India to Hindus, where they wrapped the gods in the cloth, to Persian Muslim migrants, and Buddhists would wrap the texts in cloth. So, and it continues into the African diaspora in the Americas, where one scholar, Berenstain, talks about how in Guadeloupe, descendants of enslaved Africans, they wrapped the baby during the baby baptism. They use this cloth to make a cap. So it's very similar to the Kalabari tradition and the other traditions of Nigerians in how this cloth was used. This is why I say that it's not just that cloth was a currency, which is how the Europeans saw it. For Asians and Africans, cloth had spiritual, cultural meaning that made it very, very valuable. You cannot put a price tag on these cloths, I would argue. So using her work and also tracing, there's very limited work on this RMHK into the 20th century, which is, of course, the century of the colonial period in Nigeria, and also the period where more Indian traders began settling in Nigeria once the British colonized Nigeria. And I believe, and we're still looking for records, a lot of these Indian traders were bringing cloth, because actually we see from 1900 to 1930 a boom in the production of this RMHK that was specifically going to the Nigerian market. And on the right-hand side, I have some information about the timeline of textile production and how the government tried to, different governments, the colonial government as well as the independence government in Nigeria tried to, and India tried to regulate this industry. But what I will say here is what I speculate is why this boom happened between 1900 and 1930, so well after the slave trade. I think there was more income in Nigeria to be able to purchasing power to buy this cloth. Of course, the palm oil industry had become very, very lucrative, as well as the cocoa industry. And so I suspect that part of the way Nigerians were able to fund the purchases of these cloths that became more common because of Indian traders coming in had to do with with export production, crop export production. But after 1960, because the Nigerian government put high tariffs or bans on importation of this fabric, the production levels plummeted in India, and Indian weavers were committing suicide. This is where I think connecting what's happening in India and Nigeria, which becomes harder after the end of the British period, is very important. There's more archival sources for the British period, but in the post-colonial period, this dependency that the Indian producers had on Nigerian consumers was so high that you can see how it affected the livelihoods. There's this Mr. Saker, the weaver in Nigeria, in India, also was telling me that there were many suicides because Nigerians couldn't buy the cloth. This is also the period where the Nigerian government and the World Bank began to document or argue that Nigerians were smuggling cloth into the borders from Benin and Togo and nearby countries that had fewer prohibitions on cloth. Now, I put smuggling in quotations because the way the federal government represented this was as if it was a kind of disloyalty to the government, but this was also after the Biafran crisis. And so the people who were, again, Southeast Nigerians who were invested in this cloth were kind of seen as already in a complicated relationship to the federal state. But we also have to ask, why take the risk to smuggle? And cloth is it innocent to smuggle cloth? These are questions I'm raising. I'm not imposing a judgment, but this is an interesting period because the cloth is still considered valuable, but it's harder. Its value is even increasing because it's harder and harder to come by. And this is when the period, I believe, from the late 1960s that Nigerians began to travel to India and bring this cloth themselves. And I have some information here to give more texture to this idea of why that period, from the 1960s through the 70s, that this fabric that was associated with ethnic groups in the Delta and in the Southeast, why were they more tied to this? Well, their identity was also changing in relation to Nigerian politics. I have the second bullet point, the 12-day revolution of 1966. The Niger Delta Republic was declared by Boro, and there are celebrations of his life, or remembrances of his life because he was killed. So the textiles are used for that. The Biafran Republic, we know, instituted between 67 and 1970. So fabrics like George associated with the Biafran, with Igbo identity. So, and then Indian textile businesses in Nigeria, they were huge. I mean, even though the Nigerian government tried to rein in foreign ownership, some of them became Nigerian citizens. And they were how much were they contributing to the smuggling of cloth? There are a lot of questions I can't answer. How did people get cloth through customs? I'm sure in India there was a very corrupt system of smuggling the material out where people would be paid off. We don't know how that it was brought in from Benin. So there's a lot of questions to answer that I think would be very interesting. And here, the West might see Nigeria and India in a common frame as both struggling with this issue of corruption. But often how the transnational connection actually facilitates that practice of paying off government officials for exports that were started in the colonial period or the slave trade period, we have to go back further than just saying these countries engage in corruption. So in my conclusion, I just want to conclude so we have some time for discussion. This trade is continuing, but in very interesting ways. What I have here on the right side is it's called it's called Hardcourt Fabrics in the United States, African fabric store in the US. You can see all the samples that I've picked here are madras plaid. That's what the title at the top says. This is a Nigerian diaspora business in the US selling Indian origin fabrics. And apparently, according to the website, these fabrics are made in Africa. In quotes, I say Africa, it doesn't say specifically where. But the importance of the cloth remains. And the fact that Nigerian diasporic peoples are making a business of it, I think is very, very significant. I've ordered my own order of this cloth. I'm still waiting for it to come. But you could see diasporic people are connected to flows of goods. Textiles, especially because they have identity imbued in it, but also textiles have trust. I mean, I've spoken to many people about George fabric. One person, a woman, told me, she said, we know that if we buy some of the textiles from China, you can only wear them once, but that we value the ones that are produced in India, the dyes that are used, the cotton that's used. So you can see there is this valuation and trust in the old authentic good. And I think we can talk a lot about the difference between Indian cloth and Chinese cloth, and also African produced cloth, and the quality and the way buyers assess the different qualities, because again, the buyers are adding their own special touches to the fabrics. So it matters which fabric you buy and of course how it looks. Another point is that I think this Indian scholar said to me, she said, I think the cloth that's there in Nigeria is probably better preserved than what we have in India. Think about this irony that Nigeria may be preserving India's history better than India is. I think that's very significant to think about transnational history, is how we don't have to go through Britain to do this history. In fact, maybe there's this direct Nigeria-India connection that we can trace better using new methods. And I want to end on that note and make an appeal for more transnational research between within the Global South. We don't need to necessarily only use European archives to do our research, but we can be having more dialogue, more conversation, and more cross-fertilization of ideas and people between countries like Nigeria and India. Thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Shankar. I think it's been really illuminating hearing these very deeply historical connections, and that has been lived through the transnationalism of clothes and how history has been forged, along this line, and particularly the way that this kind of connections also promises or shows promises of how we might begin to decenter the way we talk about history of connections, Afro-Asia connection in particular, but also more specifically that between Nigeria and India. And I think it raises a lot of questions about the assumptions that have seeped into the way we narrate histories of relationship. So I'm sure many in the audience, they have questions for you. We'll wait to receive all of those in the comments section. Of course, we'll take some live as well. So if you want to speak, kindly raise your hand and we'll come to you as time permits. But I think one of the things I would like that you quickly reflect on as we wait for other questions, is about the extent to which you think, for instance, that the rise of China disrupted textile flow between India and Nigeria. Because what we know, for instance, is that China disrupted trade. The rise of China disrupted trade in, across Asia in many ways, particularly East Asia, but also, the Southern Asia connections and disruptions are often not very clear. So if you could reflect on this, I know you tried to talk about it towards the end, but, you could reflect on it a bit further.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's a very complicated history that you're or set of factors that you're asking about, because, one of the problems I think that I've been finding more and learning more about is that some of the fabrics that come in, or other goods that come into African countries, are actually being sold as African made, but they're frauds. And so we now have this denationalization of these products, almost this deculturalization of these products. Like, I've heard about baskets being made in Asia, but then being brought back to African countries and then sold to tourists as African-made baskets, whether it's Senegal or Nigeria. And I think that question of fraud, this is a very interesting one where we could talk about, who's casting aspersion on who, where I think a lot of these fraudulent products are not originating within Nigeria. They could be being made in Asian countries. China is one. It could even be made in India and then brought back and sold as as a Nigerian cloth, right? So I think we have to investigate further how that issue of fraud and authenticity is deployed against specific countries, right? We know that Nigeria gets often billed as this particular committer of fraud, but actually I think China is engaging in that in a much higher level. And I even talked to the Senegalese crafts person who said that she found in Vietnam that they were producing Senegal baskets that were actually made in Vietnam and brought back to Senegal. So I think the more that there's a process of African governments and cultural associations putting a stamp on goods as saying this is truly African made, I think it would be really good. That's what the Italian government does. They mark things that are made in Italy through a specific process of branding. And I see that could be highly valuable for a country like Nigeria.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to bring Julius Uri Moloye, to ask his question quickly. Please, you should end this in 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Julius is my name. I'm currently even in India on sabbatical, okay, from the University of Ibadan. Now, there is something that is very, very interesting. You have already mentioned the fact that there's this handshake between Nigeria and India with respect to medical tourism, education, and all the rest of them. But you see, one thing that is very surprising to me, even till today, is that the cost of obtaining Indian visa is the most expensive in Nigeria today. And when I discussed with somebody here just yesterday, they also told me that the cost of obtaining Nigerian visa from India is also the highest. Now I am surprised that with this level of cooperation or handshake between the two nations in all these things, why are we having this kind of costly travel documents? Why? That's my question.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating question. It's a really good question that I think that I'll first say I can't answer it very directly, but there's this scholar Bonnie Gill, and maybe we can exchange email addresses, because I can show you her work, or if you don't know it already. She talks about how many people are profiting in India off of Nigerian visa problems, let's say. Say you have students or business people or people who are legitimately there on the visa, but then they can't, find a housing to stay, or they've paid these high costs and they can't leave, they don't leave right away. So there's local police, there's local landlords, there's local people who are benefiting. So one of the things we have to ask, is it something behind the scenes that we don't know, that it's not just the government that's benefiting somehow by charging this exorbitant visas, but it's also this whole economic structure that's essentially if you looked at it from the outside, you would say there's some kind of funny business going on in it, right? So but the thing is if I know, and you must know this because you're in India, that the largest African population in India is Nigerian.
Yeah,
So
sure.
and it's universities, it's
Mhm.
they're legitimate migration. This is a thing. So I think there is Bonnie Gill, her book is going to come out soon, and she's looking at Delhi specifically, and she looks at how the landlords kind of offer this protection almost to Nigerians. Okay, so but you have to pay more, right? You have to pay more in rent. So I think, I suspect there's a system, this whole underground system that's working that isn't open and visible, and this is how some people are making money off of this whole ecosystem of travel and settlement. That's my short answer, but I think we should exchange email address and continue this conversation, because I think it's also something that I don't know what the Indian business people in Nigeria are doing, how they contribute to this. Do they lobby to the the Indian embassy? I would like to interview some of them to ask them, so how have you navigated this? Because they also have been operating successful businesses for many decades. I have friends, so how did they do that? It's a question because, there's been so many government fluctuations, so many different regimes. How have they managed to stay? I have friends in Kano who've been there since, they come and go easily. Nigerians can't even come and go easily from in their own country if they live abroad and coming back, but these Indians are managing to keep a foothold in India, keep a foothold in Nigeria. They're exporting heavy equipment. I don't know how they do those things. So I think there's a lot more to investigate. So thank you for your question.
All right. So I would like to just read two questions to you. So the very first one is from Jediel Peterson, who is saying thank you, but is curious to know why the Nigerian government banned textiles coming in from India. Was this policy applied to other countries? And then outside of Southeast Nigeria, was this a popular policy? Was this a popular policy? And then the second question came from Kuduz, who is a graduate student here, and is asking that in your slide, there was something that caught my attention. It stated that indigo was cloth of sorrow that elucidates slave trade history affecting Nigerians and Indians. So here in Nigeria, so he's asking, this George material is peculiar to the Igbo people. Did this material came into existence only after the Civil War? Because that period seemed to be the most sorrowful period in southeastern Nigeria history as well. So, and what's the link to Southeast Indians? Yes.
Okay, so I'll take Jadel's question first. One of the other fabrics, I think there were multiple fabrics, but at one point there was a ban. Well, actually, Jadel is my student. She discovered this. There was a ban on Japanese fabrics because Japan also, I think there was in Nigeria as well, other African countries, because Japan had a huge trade to African countries. Um, Lace from Austria was also banned, lace cloth. And in fact, I spoke to one of my Nigerian friends who had connections in Austria, and she told me that the um the Austrian government negotiated with the Nigerian government to allow some amount of lace to come in and pay some duties. And in fact, India also did the same thing, which is after the Nigerian government banned the madras cloth, the Indian government, once the suicides happened, went to the Nigerian government and they said, please, they kind of begged the Nigerian government, can you please let some small quantity come in? So I think these governments make deals, that undercut some of the policies. But on the other question, were they popular? They were popular because the Kaduna textile mills, there was some 70 mills that came into being with Nigerian production of textiles. That was the whole purpose of the ban on the textiles. So that it was popular. It's like what in the US, what Trump is doing. It's economic nationalism, which is to say, we put tariffs on steel, we put coming from this country, we put tariffs on rice coming from this country because it's a form of economic nationalism to say we're investing in the local economy. The problem is it usually doesn't work because there are lots of factors that make, and that's something also that for economic history, for Nigeria's own economic history, it would be good to investigate, like Kamara has done. Why did the Nigerian textile industry, is it successful? It hasn't been that successful to the present, and part of that has to do with China as well. So it's a complicated story. So to Daniel's question, I think that the cloth of sorrow, yes. I think I had assumed that Indians did not know as much about the Atlantic slave trade as in the West, in West Africa, in America, in Europe, even though we could use more knowledge about the slave trade. But I think they did know, and this is why they knew, they must have known, and I wish I could find more sources like this. They must, even 200-300 years ago, Indian weavers must have known what the material was being used for. We assumed that the Europeans are the ones kind of guiding the whole machine, and the rest of us were ignorant, and we didn't know what was happening in the other corner of the world. Clearly, Nigerians knew, Indians knew what was happening. So to call it the cloth of sorrow, indigo is the cloth, the indigo cloth in particular. I think we need to investigate more these names for these cloths, and if we can find oral history that shows, how people thought about, even if we don't have written history. This George material is particular to the Igbo people, and the Kalabari people called it Injiri. No, it did not come in, it came into existence. We have the earliest references to George before the 20th century. But I do agree with you that we should trace, did the George cloth become seen as a cloth of sorrow again during the Biafran crisis, the sorrowful period, like you say, because at least for these cloths have changing meaning. They have some traditional meanings, but they also have changing meaning. And so I think your question, we could answer it better if we knew how did people change their practices as in that period of Nigerian history. Yes, and the last question that's there, I can share my slides after the meeting, definitely. And I'd be happy to hear, if people had more questions, or like Mr. Julius had, Professor Julius had had asked his question. I would be happy. It would be nice to be in touch by email to discuss these topics further.
Okay. Thanks for your comprehensive response and willingness to share the slides, but also know to others that this talk will also be available on our YouTube channel for those who want to review it again and watch. It will be freely available. So I'm wondering again about your thoughts on how the clothes themselves have become or have acquired a life of their own. So here I'm thinking about Apadurai's notion of social life of things, the way they're shaping identity and also shaping ethnic relations. Could you say that, or would you say that the clothes as forge an identity, that has been structured, in the sociological sense of structuration, to become something that stands outside of itself, become the subject of relational shaping, in the context that is being used, particularly in Eastern Nigeria?
I do think that the on a general level, I think that hand loom textiles, like we call it, the madras, or even, some of the Southwest Nigeria cloth like Asha Oke. I mean, their value has actually increased in relation to um, uh, all of this mass dumping of the secondhand cloth, right? I mean, I think if you look at, and I haven't done extensive research on this, but I was looking at wedding photographs, for example, now, and how in Igbo weddings, some of the George is used on top of the white wedding dress, right? So there is this kind of reactivation of some of the traditions. But of course, some of the traditions that we know, traditions are also not always traditional, or there's a history to them. They haven't been there since the beginning of time. And so I would say there's this layering, we can call it like a layered kind of cultural meaning to the fabrics over time, because, the other thing I wanted to emphasize, there's a lot of artists now, African artists. I've seen a Sierra Leonean artist, a Nigerian artist using some of these fabrics in making collages to commemorate the transatlantic slave trade and other colonialism, other, catastrophic events, but also that culture still has value, and that oppression didn't erase cultural meaning and value. There's one artist whose surname is Camp from Sierra Leone, who I've seen some of her work that uses the fabric. That's one example. So I do think there is this meaning making that's happening with the textiles even at present. And I think it's very much tied to traditions of doing history. And this is where I thought it was very interesting when the Indian scholar said to me, we've erased this history, but I see that Nigerians and other West Africans are actually making history with it, telling history in a way, in new ways, not just through the kind of history we do in the university, which is going to archives and studying that way, which is why looking at what diasporic migrants are making, culturally is very significant. We think of them as going for jobs, for trade, for education, but how are they changing culture or preserving culture? In this case, if Nigerians are going to India to buy this cloth, they're actually engaged in the process of preserving history. And so I think we have to expand how we think about migrants or diaspora people, and we can debate how you use those terms, diasporic aid actors. But one of the things that we shouldn't ignore is they're not just going for economic reasons, they're also going for cultural reasons.
So I think I want to drag you into a controversial space now. So if you would we apply the same logic to colonialism, particularly the theft of artifacts, on the African continent? Of course, this in books of people like Cohen and all of that, they are categorized so-called imperial, as diaspora, as also a sort of diaspora. So could it be said that the pillaging also of artifacts and all of that is part of the making history as well, in the same way that, you know, I'm just asking about the general principle of the logic that you're applying here.
Yeah, I mean, I think they contributed. Colonialists who went, came to Lagos or went to Kumasi and took the stool, the British making, they wanted those objects that represented the pinnacle of, you know,
Right.
Asante history or Yoruba history, right? They they did have an eye for which things were valuable,
Mm, mm,
because clearly they took valuable things.
mm, mm.
And which is why the repatriation of these objects is so important. And there's more value now because they've been expropriated and now they're to come back. And so I like to think of all of these material objects as in an economy, in a cultural economy, right? That's the kind of approach I'm even using to textiles. Their meaning is made by the, like you said, using appadare. I mean, in the context of the human interactions. It's not like we're talking about diamonds or even diamonds. I mean, gold. All of the meaning in those objects, the value is made by the interactions. And so, I think that the colonialists, the ones who, because there were ones who stayed in the countries and did in the metropole, and they did their actions to for empire, but migrating to the imperial spaces and taking material objects was very fundamental to power.
So, thank you so much for that brilliant response. Just playing the devil's advocate,
That's
argumentative
okay.
one, actually. But I think it's really an impressive response because this is exactly what scholarship is about, to asking those questions and getting this very important feedback. And on that note, I would just like to say thank you. This is all the time we can take. It's been a wonderful 1 hour. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that a lot of our graduate students that are here and other guests who joined us from everywhere have also learned a thing or two. And this will be the end of the session. And we'd like to thank Professor Shobana Shankar for a deeply engaging and intellectually stimulating talk. Your insight has enriched us really wonderfully. Apologies for the sound. There's a battery that's coming from somewhere there. So we'd like to also thank the director of the center, Professor Shenayola Olua, for joining us, for his leadership, and then also for our partners, NIDCON, the IAS, and then also the TED Fund who has graciously funded the establishment of this center. On that note, we say that we look forward to welcoming everyone when we host the next ADRRC seminar series. So thank you for joining us and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope to be in Ibadan next time.
Yes.
This
Thank
talk.
you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you. Nice to see you,
Yeah.
everybody. Thank
Same
you.
here.
Thanks, Prof.
All right. Bye.
Bye.